Hey everyone, my name is Mark Moykins from Big Mount Studio. Animation can make a world of difference to make your apps look so much better and give the user a better experience while using your application. So here's what we're going to do. I have this fake application right here that I built, and there's a button down at the bottom for more functionality. Now as you can see, the UI is pretty plain because it's inspired from a designer whose name is Dieter Rams, and he worked for Braun. That's why it says Braun up here. And he believed in using minimal but beautiful design in his products that he built for Braun. He used to work for Braun. So what I have here is I have a minimal amount of functionality where you can click the middle to play and pause the songs. And then you have two controls for the next song and previous song. And then you have this button down here where you can like the song, or you can turn shuffle on, turn shuffle off, or repeat. If you like the song, you just keep repeating the song. And that's basically what I'm going to show you is how to animate these buttons. So when you click it, they pop out, you click it again, and they collapse. Okay, so let's get started. I have a project here with all the buttons on it, but in the view controller, there's no code. So that's the first thing we want to do is we want to create outlets for these buttons because we're going to be referencing them. So let's make ourselves some space here. And let's create some outlets for these buttons. So this I'm going to call the More button. Build failed. Oh, yeah, this is interesting. Look at this. I ran into this problem when I first created this project. This repeat is actually a reserved word, and I can't use it. So what I have to do is let's delete this, and let's go in here. When you delete an outlet, you have to make sure the outlet is also deleted from the storyboard. So what I do is I just right click and you can see all the deleted outlets because they'll have this this yellow triangle on it. And so we're just going to click that. And let's give this a different name. We'll call it the repeat button. There we go. Okay, now the next thing I want to do too is you saw when I click these buttons, I toggled them to a different image. And I have all the images in here already. So you can see there's the More button. And then there's the More. So I named them all consistently. There's an off state, this is the off state, and then that's the on state. Same with the like. Okay, so I have all these buttons. I just want to shuffle them now. And not shuffle them. I clicked on the shuffle button. I want to toggle them. So let's create that functionality. When I click it, I want to toggle the image. And we want actions. And this will just be more, I'll just call it more clicked. I want to pass in a button because that way when I'm going to be using that parameter, here I'll show you. I'm going to use this parameter, this sender parameter, and I don't want to have to cast it as a UI button. So I just made it a UI button instead. Okay, so let's do one. Now basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at the image. Sender.currentImage, that's the current one that's displaying. And if that equals, it's what it's called More, right? If it equals More off, then I want to change it to More on, right? More on. I don't know if you guys will get that joke. Okay, so let's change that. And the way we do that is we want to set the image. You can't just say button.image equals something because there's different states when you click on the buttons. And I'll show you the different states that we have. So here we're going to pass in, if it's off, we want to be on. And for the state, you see there's different states, right? If there's a disabled button, maybe you want a different image. If it's when it's focused, you want a different image or highlighted. But we just want normal. When it's normal, we're just going to use this image for everything. Okay, if off equals false, then we're going to make it off. Okay, so that should make sense to you guys. We're just basically toggling the image. And let's run that in just a test to make sure that code works before we start writing more code. Okay, here's the button. Yep, that works perfectly. Okay, good. So let's keep using that code then. Okay, we'll start with the shuffle button. Let's create that action. And we want to change type to any to UI button. Okay, now you know, I could do this. I could copy this code and basically have like the same thing in there, like that. But I'm kind of like duplicating code, right? So maybe there's a better way. Maybe instead of doing this, maybe what I'll do is, let's undo that. Maybe what I'll do is just call a function instead. And we'll call it toggle button. So now we could just call toggle button right here. And we want to just pass in the sender, which is our button. And our on image, let's see, this is shuffle. So we want the shuffle on. And then we want the shuffle off. Like that. And we can also delete this and also call the same function. All right, let's test that, see if it works. And actually, I'm just going to go to full code view here. There we go. That works, and that works. All right, good. So it should be easy from here to do the other outlets, right? So we just need a couple more functions for our other buttons. Okay, so let's test that. Perfect. Everything's working great. Now the next thing that we can move into is we're going to click this button, and when we click it, when it's in the on state, we want these buttons to come out. Now notice I place these buttons in their destination locations. And that's what I would advise to you guys too. When you do animation, start with where you want the control to be at the end of the animation, and then go backwards from there. I found that works a lot easier. I could just as well take all these buttons and put them under this button. So when you click it, then they go out to they animate to the destination. And when you click it again, it goes back to their home destination, which is under the button. But I find that is a lot harder to do when you're testing to get the locations just right. So what I recommend is when you're doing animations is put the control in its destination at the end of the animation. And then when you start the animation, move it to its new location and then have it go to its destination. All right, so where do we start? Well, what I want to do is when the application starts, I actually want to change the location of these buttons so they're hiding underneath this one. So let's do that. We have all the outlets that we need, so we don't really need the UI open anymore. Now, when the application starts, I want to move all the buttons to be underneath the toggle button. So the way to do that, I can just say, let's see, shuffle, it's my button, dot center equals the more button, yeah, this one right here, dot center. And basically what that does, you can use the center for locating objects or moving objects to new places. Center is just a point, it's an XY coordinate. And so what I'm doing basically is I'm just making the center on the shuffle the same as the more button. And what's important for this to work is, take a look at this. Actually, we do need to reference the storyboard again. So basically what I want to do is these buttons, I want them to be underneath this button. So when I click it, I don't want the button to appear on top and then come out. I want to kind of give the illusion that the button is animating out from underneath it. So I'm going to move this button all the way down here. So now the button is at the very top and everything else will be below it. All right, let's do that with the other buttons too. So far so good. Let's just take a look at that. Perfect. All the buttons are now underneath the more button. And you can see all these images, but remember, all the images will have an alpha of 0, so you won't be able to see them when the application starts. Only when you click the button will you be able to see them as they start to come out. Okay, good. So the next step is to actually do the animation. And how do we know when to animate the buttons to go out and how to animate the buttons to go in? Well, one thing that I could do is basically just take a look at the image on the button. So if I say like if more dot current image, current image equals off, then here I want to I guess you could say expand the buttons, else I want to collapse the buttons. Now, this code is actually in the wrong place because remember, when I click it, I'm going to change the image. So then I'll be checking the wrong image here. I'll be changing the image and then checking what it is. So what I'm going to do is I actually want to move this up above here. There we go, like that. Okay, so expanding the buttons, let's write that code. Now here's where the animation actually comes in. What I'm going to do is all your animation functions are off this UI view here. And as I start to type in animate, you see there's a bunch of different options here that I can choose. Today, in this tutorial, we're just going to use the simplest one, which is the first one right here. Animate changes to one or more views using the specified duration. And that's what we're doing. Views, when they say views, we're animating buttons. But all the controls that show on the UI are UI views. They inherit or implement UI view. So when it says views, they're talking about anything that's showing on the UI. Now, what I usually find, and I've read this a lot in other blogs, is 0.03 is usually a good duration time. So I usually start with that, test it, and then I'll change it, increase the time or shorten the time to something that seems more appropriate. Okay, so I hit tab and the second parameter highlights. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an open brace and a closed brace. And this is where all the animation happens. Right in here. So what do we know? The first thing we want to move, we'll just start with the shuffle button. And we want to change the shuffle back to its destination center. But right now, I don't know what its destination was because I already moved the button to be under more. So what I'm going to do is I want to store the destination locations when the app starts before I move it. So I'm going to put them right here. And to store the locations, this center, let's take a look at the type here. It is a CG point, core graphics point. And again, a point just has an X and a Y coordinate. It's basically an X and a Y coordinate. So let's create some variables for these buttons. Oh, of course, maybe if I put the var in front of it, it'll help. And what I'm going to do, now notice there's a problem right now. If we click on this, it says view controller has no initializers. That is so confusing. What does that mean? Well, in Swift, every variable that you declare has to have a value, or you have to guarantee that it has a value. Now notice right here, when we declare these outlets, we're not assigning a value to any of these buttons. But what we do is we put an exclamation point on it, and that is basically saying, I will definitely have a value when this view controller initializes. And so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to say this will definitely have a value when our app starts. Okay, so we need center variables for the other buttons too. Now we just want to assign these variables. All right, good. So now I can actually do the animation. This is what we've been waiting for. Now, something else I want to describe here too, or explain here. This part right here is called, in Swift, it's called a code block. And it happens in a different thread. And basically what I mean is, when you run the program, it happens in one space in memory. And then in here, inside this code block here, this happens in a different space in memory. So it needs to refer to the other space in memory. So imagine this is one space of memory, and now that it needs to know about the shuffle button, for example. So I can't just say shuffle button. Well, I can, but watch what happens here. Here's the shuffle button. Because what I want to do is I want to say center equals shuffle button center, right? But watch what happens. Okay, it's giving me this warning here. Reference to property shuffle in closure, but that's what I mean. This is a closure. It's a different space in memory. Requires explicit self to make capture semantics explicit. To make capture semantics explicit. Okay, that sometimes I don't know what these guys working at Apple are thinking, when they when they use terminology like this, because it really doesn't help a lot of like beginner developers figure this out, and it's very confusing. But basically, what it means is it needs to refer to these variables outside of this space and memory, and it needs the word self. It needs to know that it needs to come here. Self is basically the class that you're in, and it needs to get the variable from this location in memory, so it can use it in this location in memory. All right, we're just going to click the fix it. Okay, there we go. And we want to do that with the other buttons too, right? Okay, good. So let's test that. And this is a good practice too. As you're coding, you want to constantly be testing, because if you write too much code and all of a sudden it doesn't work, you're not quite sure at what point did the code stop working. Look at that. It's perfect. Okay, so nothing happens when I click it again. So that will be the opposite, is getting them to collapse, which will be right here. We don't need that comment. Okay, so now we want to do the opposite. We want to get everything to collapse. And basically, we're already collapsing the buttons right here, right? So we could just use that code. So remember, to do the animate, just type in UI view. And this is something you want to commit to memory, or just use it so much that it becomes natural. UI view.animate. Just remember that, UI view.animate. Say it 10 times fast, and then you'll never forget it. Okay, UI view.animate. And then we're going to go with the same time frame, 0.3 seconds. And then again, I'm just going to create a code block here. Or what did it call it up here? It called it a closure. So we're going to create a closure. And then I'm just going to put that code in there. This will collapse it again. And of course, it'll need the self. So let's just go through, do the fix-its. All right, great. Now let's test that. Look at this. It's looking beautiful. And I can toggle these options, collapse them, show them again. Now, there's just one thing missing, of course, and that is we have to change the alpha property. So here, when we start the animation, we're going to assume that the alpha is set to 0 for all of our buttons. So now when we show the buttons, we want to change their alpha property to 1 so they're visible. I'm just going to delete this here. Okay, so let's do that. And then when we come into this part, this is where we are collapsing the buttons, and so we want to hide the buttons now. And I'm just going to copy this code and change them all to zeros. There we go. Okay, now let's test that. Okay. Now remember, on the storyboard, the alpha is still set to 1, so that's why we can see these. But if I click it and then click it again, we don't see them because it's hiding them. So now for the final touch, we're almost done. Let's just go to the storyboard. And we'll change these buttons. I'm holding down the shift button. You can also hold down command and do multiple select. And if you select multiple controls, it'll show you all their properties. So when you change one, it changes all of them. And we're going to just change this to 0. There we go. So now when we run it, this should be the final version and everything should be looking great. There we go. We don't see any of the other buttons. We click it. We have the animation. It shows our other options here. We can click these, collapse them, change them, and that's it. So there's your first introduction to some simple UI animation. And remember, how do you animate? That's right, UI view.animate. You got to memorize that because you're going to be using it so much in your career and so much in the future, and you're going to love using it and looking for ways to use it to make your UI look that much better and give the user a much better experience while using your application. I mean, just simple things like this, makes the users happy. Okay, I hope you learned something that you can use in your applications today. If you liked the video and you learned something new, then give it a like down below. That really helps me out. Also, consider sharing it with your friends who might also want to learn this information. You can do that by clicking the share button below, and it gives you a bunch of different options. You can share it on Facebook or Twitter or any of your other favorite social medias. And then Also consider subscribing because I'm going to be coming out with more videos like this in the future. Thank you. Bye.